Hello everybody and welcome to Minecraft Disney World, the series in which I explore Walt Disney World attractions recreated on a one-to-one scale here in the game of Minecraft, while also exploring the real-life history of the actual attraction from Disney World itself. Today we are in Epcot and we're taking a look at one of the most beloved attractions in Future World, Journey into Imagination. And today we're going to be taking a look at all three incarnations of it because, like many attractions here at Disney World, it has gone through a number of changes over the years. Now, the first and arguably most beloved version of this attraction opened on March 5th of 1983, and it was called Journey into Imagination. Now, the attraction was designed by famous Imagineers Tony Baxter and Steve Kirk. Now, when Tony Baxter's ideas for the Land Pavilion were turned down, he turned his attention to the Kodak Pavilion and decided to work on an attraction based on the imagination. Now, it took 6 months for him to take that idea and expand it into the attraction, and ultimately the core idea behind it was that for any sort of ideas or imagination, you gathered, you stored, and you recombined. And his words were, whether you're a writer or a scientist or an artist or a teacher or someone making a cake, it's the same thing. Gather, store, and recombine. Now, the character of the Dreamfinder sort of came from an older Disneyland project that never came to fruition called Discovery Bay. It was going to be this part of the park that focused on all of these imaginative ideas, sort of thought to be the sort of place where a Thomas Edison or an H.G. Wells would get together and come up with these crazy ideas. Now, one of the attractions from this Discovery Bay project was called Professor Marvel's House of Illusions, and it would be hosted by Professor Marvel, who would be this scientist with a big beard who had this hobby of breeding dragons, and this would eventually evolve into the idea of Dreamfinder and Figment. And funny enough, Figment itself was an idea that sort of came from an episode of Magnum P.I. that Tony Baxter watched. At that point, one of the characters had seen a garden that was destroyed and said, hey, Magnum, come here. This garden's destroyed. And the person who he's talking to, Magnum, says, oh, it's just a figment of your imagination. And the character replied something to the effect of, figments don't eat flowers. And that's where Tony sort of got this idea of sort of creating a character that represented the figment of the imagination. And that sort of combined with the idea of these dragons that Professor Marvel was breeding sort of gave way to the idea of the figment that we all know and love today. This attraction, like many attractions at Disneyland and Disney World, made use of the Omni Mover system, which was a system of cars that were all connected together and moved at one uniform speed. That way you could have a non-stop flow of guests through the attraction, although this attraction itself had a very special feature on top of that. You see, there was a 4-minute scene that actually introduced the characters of Dreamfinder and Figment, and in order to keep the ride vehicle moving while still having a long-term scene like that, involved taking a turntable of sorts and putting 5 identical scenes on the turntable. Sort of think of the Carousel of Progress, but if every scene was exactly the same. And the idea was that your ride vehicle would lock into place in this turntable and it would all spin at the same speed, sort of like cogs in a gear. And that way you would be able to watch the entire scene as everything was rotating around, and then it would disattach and move on for the rest of the ride. Unfortunately, to the dismay of many Disney fans, the attraction closed in 1998 and underwent a transformation. It reopened on October 1st of 1999, and this time it was called Journey into Your Imagination, and it was a radical change. This was an updated theme that sort of tied into the new attraction there, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, which was based on Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and now the guests were taking a tour through the Imagination Institute, and they would be the test subjects of these new inventions. And instead of being hosted by Dreamfinder and Figment, this version of the attraction saw you hosted by Dr. Nigel Channing, who was played by Eric Idle, and took you around. Now, Figment technically was still in the attraction, but he was reduced to a couple of cameos in the Q movies, and you could hear him at the end in the Connection Lab, but he's shooed off by Dr. Channing. And Dreamfinder wasn't in the attraction whatsoever. This version of the attraction saw a lot of harsh criticisms, and in 2001, the attraction was closed down for yet another renovation. Now, in 2002, it reopened, and this version was created by Tom Fitzgerald, who actually created the version before it, and this version was known as Journey into Imagination with Figment, and this is the version that we still have today. Figment came back with a larger role, appearing in every scene this time, and the famous song One Little Spark, composed by the Sherman Brothers, also came back with a couple of new verses. While the Dreamfinder didn't return, he did get his own homage. One of the office doors in the initial showroom has the name Dean Finder, which is of course alluding to Dreamfinder. But that's not the only reference. There are actually a lot of elements in this attraction that sort of suggest that the Imagination Institute is connected to something called Medfield College, and Medfield College is actually the setting of a couple of live-action Disney movies. And this is through the doors of offices that you walk past in the queue line. One of the doors was for Professor Brainerd, who was a character in The Absent-Minded Professor, and later again in the remake of the movie, which was known as Flubber and played by Robin Williams. You had an office door for Wayne Selinsky, who was played by Rick Moranis and was in all of the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids films. And one of them was for Dean Higgins, who was played by Joe Flynn and was in the Computer Wore tennis shoes, which got its own homage because there's a sign in front of a computer room that said no tennis shoes allowed. And if you look inside that room, you can actually see a Letterman's jacket for Medfield College. Now, even though the attraction's still running today, Kodak, who sponsored the attraction from day one, ended its sponsorship in August of 2010 after almost 28 years of sponsorship. Now, one interesting aspect of the attraction that I think could be argued is that the popularity of Figment as a character, which has grown over the decades, could almost be attributed to the decision to not include any characters in Epcot initially. Back when Epcot first started, the executives at Disney felt that this park should sort of stand on its own and not be another Magic Kingdom. And so as a result, they had a strict rule of not including any of the famous Disney characters in the park itself. That included Mickey and Minnie and Goofy and Donald and characters like that. However, the design of the attraction allowed for the character of Figment, and being the only character for a short time in the parks probably played a part in him becoming as famous as he was. And since then, he's sort of unofficially become the mascot of Epcot as a whole. Journey into Imagination is an interesting attraction because it's sort of spawned a cult following. Whether it's the expansion of the universe through a comic book series about the history of Dreamfinder, or the spreading of rumors about, film adaptations of the stories of Dreamfinder and Figment, it's clear to see that many Disney fans love both Dreamfinder, Figment, and Journey into Imagination. Now that's just a short look into Journey into Imagination. If you like this video, I have plenty more that explore the history of plenty of other Disney World attractions, and I even have a couple based on Disneyland attractions. You can follow me on Twitter at RobPlays or on Instagram at RobPlaysThatGame. Let me know in the comments below if you loved Journey into Imagination. Maybe you loved the first version like most people, or maybe you're an outlier and you actually enjoyed Journey into Your Imagination or even the new current version. In any case, thanks for watching, have a great weekend, whatever you're doing, make the most of it because it makes it that much better, and I hope to see you all next time for the next episode of Minecraft Disney World. Bye everybody.